Hi everyone, my name's Chris and today I'm looking at a brand new lens from Tamron, the 18-200mm f3.5 to 6.3 Di2 VC. It's a super zoom lens for APS-C digital SLR cameras, which comes in at the astonishingly low price of only £179 or $250 US. For a brand new lens with such a huge zoom range, as well as image stabilization, that really is a very low price indeed. Presumably this new lens is meant to be a smaller and much less expensive alternative to Tamron's own 16-300mm lens. Don't mix it up with their 18-200mm Di3 VC lens, which is more expensive and designed for smaller mirrorless cameras. If you own a digital SLR camera and not a mirrorless camera, then you want this newer Mark II lens. Its zoom range of 18-200mm covers a fairly wide angle to long telephoto focal length, which makes it a handy all-in-one lens, useful for travelling. In case anyone's interested to know, here's what the picture looks like if you use it on a full-frame camera. Obviously it's much happier at home on a smaller APS-C sensor. But lenses with huge zoom ranges often have weaker picture quality, as well as a dark maximum aperture. They don't let in much light. This Tamron lens starts at f3.5 at the wide angle end, and darkens to a rather narrow f6.3 as you zoom in, as you can see here. Thankfully, this new lens has image stabilization, which Tamron call VC, which will help you to get sharper pictures. Here's some video footage without stabilization, and here it is turned on. As you can see, it holds your image very still and it works quietly. However, as you pan and move around, the stabilization becomes quite jerky, which isn't great news if you're trying to get some nice handheld video footage. Well, let's look a bit more at its build quality. Despite its very low price, the lens feels solid enough to handle, and it's relatively light and not very big. It's built on an interesting lens mount, which seems to be half plastic and half metal, as you can see here. There is, however, a rubber gasket around the lens mount, which gives you an extra level of weather sealing. The lens's rubberized zoom ring is not particularly smooth. Its resistance gets a little stronger and lighter at various points, but it works well enough. There is a zoom lock switch in case the mechanism gets looser over time. The lens's focus ring lies at the front end. It actually turns more smoothly than the zoom ring, with hard stops at either end, but it only travels about 30 degrees at the most. That's one of the most imprecise focus rings I've ever used, so focusing manually is not easy with this lens. Also, you should only turn the focus ring when the lens is set to manual focus, otherwise you could damage the focus motor. Both the zoom and focus rings turn the same way as Nikon lenses do, and the opposite way to Canon's lenses, so some Canon users will just have to get used to that. The lens's autofocus mechanism uses an old-fashioned DC motor, but in fairness, it is pretty much the quietest I've ever tested, which is good news. As you can see, it works at quite an average speed. Its accuracy during testing was reasonably good, but then again, that's not hard for an APS-C camera lens with a dark maximum aperture. Here you can see the lens autofocusing in video mode. Unfortunately, the internal microphone of the camera picks up quite a bit of noise from the lens's focus mechanism. It comes with a free lens hood that clips on quite securely and an impressive 5-year warranty from Tamron. The whole package is not too bad, and on the whole, you get a decent enough lens for your money here. It's quite good looking as well. The only major black mark is that imprecise manual focus ring, but it's still workable enough if used with care. Let's take a look now at image quality. I'll be testing the lens on a camera with one of Canon's venerable 18 megapixel sensors, the Canon 100D. Really fun little camera to use, by the way. Let's start at 18mm with the aperture wide open at f3.5. In the middle of the image, the lens is averagely sharp with neutral colours and good contrast. Over in the corners, the lens is pretty soft at f3.5. Stop the aperture down to f5.6 for considerably more sharpness and brightness in those corners, although some green and pink chromatic aberration becomes apparent on contrasting edges. Image quality in the middle, though, is great at f5.6. Stop down to f8 for another improvement in the middle and back in the corners, although that colourful chromatic aberration is still quite apparent. So it's rather an average performance at 18mm. Let's zoom in now halfway to 100mm. At the new maximum aperture of f5.6, the image is a little soft in the middle of the picture and slightly softer again in the corners. Stop down the aperture to f8 for a slight improvement in the corners, but an acceptably sharp picture in the middle of the image frame. Nothing special here really, although at 100mm there is a little less chromatic aberration. Finally, let's zoom in all the way to 200mm. At f6.3, the picture quality is noticeably soft in the middle of the image. The corners of the image are very soft indeed, with strong green and pink chromatic aberration. What a shame. Stop down to f8 for a slight improvement in those corners and acceptable image quality in the middle of the image frame. Stop all the way down to f11 for good quality in the middle and a somewhat clearer picture again in those corners. If you were to stop the aperture down any more than this though, the picture would start getting softer again due to the physical effects of diffraction. Overall, I was pretty disappointed by this Tamron lens as it only offers the kind of image quality we were seeing on super zoom lenses 15 years ago. It's simply not a sharp lens, and its problems with chromatic aberration only make things worse. Weak. In terms of distortion and vignetting, the lens performs quite averagely. At its widest angle, we see strong barrel distortion and some darkness in the corners at f3.5. Stop down to f5.6 though for more brightness in those corners. When you zoom into 30mm, the distortion straightens out, and when you zoom in a bit further, it flips into pincushion distortion. At 200mm, the pincushion distortion is strong, and we see some pretty dark corners here too, until we stop the aperture down to f8. So it's your typical super zoom lens roller coaster of vignetting and distortion here. Nothing out of the ordinary, I'm afraid. The lens can focus as closely as 50cm from your subject. Not as close as some other super zoom lenses, but not bad either. You can get quite close if you zoom in. Unfortunately, the lens's close-up image quality is poor, producing some extremely soft images at f6.3. Stop the aperture down to f8 for slightly better quality, and down at f11 you can get a sharp image. So if you're planning on shooting close-up with this lens, stop down your aperture. Let's take a look at how the lens works against bright lights. It's not really a great performance. You can see quite a bit of flaring and a bit of loss of contrast when very bright lights come into your picture frame. Not a very good performance, but I have seen worse than this. Finally, let's look at the quality of this lens's bokeh, or the out-of-focus backgrounds. At wide angles, you can't really get a very out-of-focus background, but they do look a little busy and unattractive. The good news is that, as you zoom in, the bokeh starts to look very nice and smooth. Overall, I was pretty disappointed with this new Tamron 18-200mm lens. Its very low price is impressive and its build quality is nice enough, but the image quality didn't quite make it to the party, and I think that even beginner photographers will find themselves wanting more. I'd recommend saving up a bit more money for the Sigma 18-200mm C lens, or Canon's very nice 18-135mm STM, if you're looking for a smaller super zoom lens. They are both noticeably sharper lenses, and the Canon lens has lovely build quality, but I would avoid this particular Tamron lens.